Russia and Turkey agreed to push Kurdish forces out of northeast Syria after a US brokered ceasefire expired. But as Washington pulls back, is Russia becoming the region's new power broker? And what are the implications for the wider Middle East? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I am Hashem Ahelbarra. Russia and Turkey are on opposite sides of the war in Syria. Moscow backs the Syrian president, while Ankara supports opposition rebels who want to remove Bashar Al Assad. But the two sides have been working more closely in recent months. Russian military police have started patrols in northeast Syria as part of a new deal with Turkey. On Tuesday, Presidents Vladimir Putin and Recep Tayyip Erdogan gave Kurdish fighters 6 days to pull back from the Syrian-Turkish border. They reached the agreement just before the end of the US brokered ceasefire that halted Turkey's military offensive in the region. Ankara considers the Kurdish fighters to be terrorists and wants them out so it can create the so-called safe zone for Syrian refugees to return.
By removing threats posed by the terrorist organization, this operation in Syria guarantees Syria's territorial integrity and political unity. We never had eyes on the country's territory and sovereignty. As Turkey, all steps we have taken in the field, we have taken with sensitivity.
We share Turkey's concern about the growing threats of terrorism and the growth of ethnic tensions in the region. These tensions and the separatist mood in recent times were, in our opinion, artificially created by outsiders.
So let's look at how Moscow has been expanding its influence in Syria and the Middle East. In 2015, it sent troops to Syria in support of President Bashar Al Assad. 2 years later, Russia began talks aimed at resolving the conflict, sidelining the US. Moscow's sale of its S-400 missile defense system to Turkey has also angered Washington and driven a wedge between the two NATO allies. And there's Russia's recent alliance with Saudi Arabia. Earlier this month, President Vladimir Putin made his first official visit to the kingdom in over a decade. Let's introduce our panel on Skype. In Akçakli, Turkey, near the Syrian border, Yusuf Alabarda, a retired colonel of the Turkish Armed Forces. In Moscow, Pavel Flegenhauer, a defense and military analyst. And also on Skype from Oxford in the UK, Samuel Ramani, a researcher at Oxford University, a member of the Valde Discussion Club, a Moscow-based think tank and discussion forum. Welcome to you all. Yusuf, how do you see the new agreement between Recep Tayyip Erdogan and Vladimir Putin? Is it a continuation of what they have achieved in the past over Syria, particularly in the northern part of the country?
Okay, this agreement in between the Russian President Putin and Turkey is also a continuation of the agreement or deal which has been signed in between United States and Turkey. That means that United States and Russia both are worried about the concerns of the Turkey, about its security concerns and the refugee concerns. So it has been approved by the United States, and they told to the YPG forces to go south because Turkey has legitimate concerns about its security. And yesterday it has also been approved by the Moscow that Turkey has legitimate concerns over security, so the YPG forces should move to the south and never pose a threat to the Turkish border security.
A golden opportunity, Pavel, this should be for the Russians. They have been expanding their influence except for the northeastern part of Syria. And suddenly when the Americans pulled out, they saw the opening and they saw the opportunity and decided to take action.
Well, yes, this is a great opportunity and a lot has been already achieved. Russia is trying to be allied or have very good relations at the same time with Turkey and with the YPG. The Americans tried to do that And but they failed miserably, and now they have bad relations with the YPG and bad relations with Turkey at the same time. So it's a kind of zero-sum game. American loses, Russia gains, and that's a very important thing because it changes actually the balance to a large extent in the region, with Washington and Trump talking about withdrawing not only from Syria, but most likely from other places, and Russia is trying to fill in the boots.
Samuel, is this a win-win situation for both Turkey and Russia, or do you think that the Russians are making most of the gains from this agreement?
I think that compared to the U.S. ceasefire agreement that was done last week, I think that Turkey is in a weaker position now with the Russian agreement. Why? Because they're confined now in terms of territorial expansion. They only have a 120-kilometer wide safe zone, and compared to a 440-kilometer safe zone they could have had before. And villages like Kemlishi and some other areas are no longer part of the Turkish sphere of influence. So I think that Russia basically acknowledged that the YPG were a security threat to Turkey, which is not something that's outside of their previous policies, because they had supported the Operation Olive Branch offensive against Afrin in January 2018, in exchange for Turkey recognizing the presence of Syrian government forces patrolling their border. So effectively, Turkey is partially recognizing Assad's suzerainty and legitimacy in that area. So I think that overall, they have less territorial reach, less prospects for expansion, and they now have to work with Assad, which isn't something that's very good from Erdogan's perspective.
Yusuf, do you see this agreement as the only last chance given for Turkey? Because initially, as Samuel was basically saying, they were saying they would further expand their military operation. Now they are confined to a particular area. They're not going to go to Kobani. They're not going to be able to go to Manbij. And what kind of impact will it have on national security for Turkey in the future?
When this operation has started at the eastern part of Turkey, Turkey has put two goals, political goals. None of the military operations are conducted without setting a political goal. What was the Turkey's political goal? To keep YPG forces 30 kilometers south of its border. So this political goal will be completed, will be achieved with the agreement which has been done with Russia. So I don't agree with my counterpart who says that Turkey is controlling less area, less territory when it is compared with its agreement with the United States. But let's remember that Turkey has no intention to conquer and control lands. Turkey has an intention to clear 30 kilometers of the security zone from all kinds of YPG forces. So if you take a look at from this perspective, that Turkey's political goal has already been established, has already been achieved if the YPG forces withdraw all its forces 30 kilometers to the south. So I evaluate and analyze this situation according to the not military goals and targets, but to the political goals and targets. As you know, Mr. Erdogan addressed at the United Nations, also addressed there, he said that 35 kilometers or 30 kilometers should be free from all kind of terrorist groups. So when you take a look at from this perspective, Turkey achieved its goal.
Pavel, but don't you see this new agreement as something that could pose enormous challenges for Russia in the near future, because they will have to deal with the Turks, with the SDF, with their ally Bashar Al Assad in an ever-shifting political landscape?
Yes, that will require a lot of skill in performing inside Syria. Apparently, the Russian leadership, the Russian military there believe that they can manage it. This is a great opportunity to push the Americans out, to get control of important areas. And what has not yet been decided, and apparently was not decided in Sochi, or at least we don't know, it was not maybe, it's not in the published memorandum, is where does go the control of the Syrian oil fields, the very important, strategically important Syrian oil fields that were under American Kurdish control in the north of the Euphrates, and which Russia very much wanted to to take control of, not for itself, not that we need more oil, but for the Syrian government per se, because that would give them a source of income that they don't have. And that would also help Iran, that was mostly financing the Assad government, because now they're also very short on currency, free currency, because of the American sanctions. So right now it's not clear who's going to control the oil fields in Dar al-Zor and in the other parts of the former Kurdish Rojava.
Samuel, I mean, from a Turkish perspective, the SDF and the YPG are an existential threat to their national security. Amid that perspective, do you have any concerns that the potential for a confrontation in that area to recur anytime soon is there?
I think it depends, obviously, on how the evacuation takes place. I think that certainly after the cessation of Operation Peace Spring, after the Trump ceasefire deal, there were some Syrian Kurdish leaders who were talking openly about how northern Syria is our homeland. We had controlled 1/4 of Syria. We had the right to autonomy here, and we have seen our autonomy and our suzerainty taken away from us by the international community, by Russia, the United States, and especially by Turkey's military offensive. So as long as those Kurdish nationalist and autonomy goals still persist, I can see the Kurds putting up some resistance. But it appears as if for now, the Syrian Kurds have complied with the regulations that were stipulated. They've withdrawn. They're on the process of withdrawing from the territory. So I think that an immediate confrontation is unlikely, but in the long term, as long as those nationalist impulses are there and there's distrust of the Americans, Russians, and the Turks all at the same time, a re-escalation in northern Syria is certainly possible in the months to come.
Yusuf, what's the end game for Turkey here? Is it just to establish this safe corridor to prevent SDF fighters from being closer to the border? Or do you think it's the beginning of a new phase where the Turks will repatriate the more than 4 million Syrian refugees back into their villages or into the northeastern part of Syria?
Okay, as I said before, that Turkey has two political goals. One of them is to secure the area. The other one is that Turkey is dealing with more than 3.6 million refugees inside its country, giving them healthcare, schools, all kind of facilities, and spent billions of dollars from only its own budget. For this reason, Turkey wants them to return back to this secure zone on free will, if Turkey can achieve. Not all of them, but maybe in the first phase 1 million, in the second phase is 2 million. For this reason, the game now is starting in a very different situation, that Turkey will try to resettle almost 2 million refugees to this secure area, because when you take a look at to the international community, no one cares about what is going on inside Turkey in terms of refugee crisis. For this reason, the Turkey has two political goals, and the second phase probably will start no sooner than in 6 months, because Turkey will first prepare those territory in order to available for a good life, like in the case of Azaz, Jarablus, and in the other parts of the Afrin. In the other parts of the Afrin area, for example, schools are operating, hospitals are caring, giving people health care. For this reason, there should be lots to done. The other issue that if the PKK and YPG forces go to the south of this area, probably it will also a guarantee to the territorial integrity of the Syria, because YPG was the biggest threat together with the United States to the territorial integrity of the Syria.
Okay. Pavel, repatriating Syrian refugees, don't you see this as more of a political issue that will have to involve both the Russians and the Syrian government at the end of the day?
Creating such a zone that's going to be housing quite a big number of Syrian refugees that ran from the war, but many of them ran from Syria because they don't like Al Assad. And there's going to be, of course, the Free Syrian Army that was the spearhead of the Turkish invasion forces moving into northern Syria and will stay and control this area. So that's kind of creating an anti-Assad zone. There's going to be a big population and anti-Assad apparently, and there's going to be armed forces anti-Assad. Assad won't like it, of course. Damascus won't like it. For Russia, maybe it's a bit of a different issue because Russian perspective is much more wider. It's the entire region, the standoff with the United States globally. In this standoff, maybe Turkey is more important than Assad if Turkey can be pulled further away from NATO and from America. And of course, there's also a role for the YPG to play, with which Russia has a very long established relationship. Rojava has an embassy actually in Moscow de facto for some years. So this is going to be a very complicated play there, in not only involving this northern part of Syria, the former Rojava, but also all of Syria.
I see your point.
Where Russia will be minding its own business primarily.
Samuel, as the Americans are pulling out, do you see now the Turks and the Russians most likely the two key players who are going to shape the future of Syria with or without a political agreement?
I think that, yes, Russia and Turkey have now ensconced themselves as vital actors, and they will be in control over the northern part at the very least. Of course, Iran, looking at the country more broadly, has influence in southern Syria, but Iran has cleverly exempted itself and detached itself from the core conflict over here. So it criticized Turkey's conduct, but it's not really necessarily getting involved in this. It has been silent on Idlib largely since April. So the other area where this will be resolved that's interlinked to this, and I suspect over the course of a 6-hour meeting it was likely discussed, was Idlib. So if the Russians are acknowledging the YPG as a security threat, they will expect Turkey to make similar compromises on HTS and Idlib. And that has a couple of problems. First of all, will Turkey basically want to cede that city to Assad? And secondly, does Turkey have the influence over HTS and other rebel groups that Russia believes it has? I think the answers to both those questions are unclear, and Turkish influence over the rebel groups certainly has been less than advertised over the past year. So the focus has now moved from northern Syria to Idlib, the Ankara agreement, and safeguarding the oil reserves in Deir ez-Zor. Those will be the key areas, and Russia and Turkey are central in both of those areas.
Yusuf, it's really interesting what's happening in Turkey. For decades, it's been a Western ally, acquiring weapons mainly from the US. Now things seem to be quite changing. They're doing business with the Russians, charting new territory with the Russians, acquiring S-400 from the Russians. Is Erdogan trying to redefine the basic orientations of the Turkish state?
Actually, to tell the truth, the West is redefining its borders with the Turkey, its relations with the Turkey, because Turkey has also offered to the United States that he wants to buy an air defense missile system from the United States, but United States Congress for years didn't provide, although Turkey is a NATO ally. And also, you know that at the 15th of July, there happened a coup attempt inside Turkey, and the main suspect of this coup attempt especially is living inside the United States. For this reason, United States especially forced Turkey to buy air defense equipments from the Russia. The second issue is that although in the September 11 attacks, Turkey was the first country who accepted United States offer global war on terror and sent thousands of its troops and lost its soldiers inside Afghanistan, together with the United States after the Cold War, we as Turkey, to tell the truth honestly, didn't see any collaboration and coordination with the United States. Just on the contrary to that, United States sent hundreds of thousands of trucks full of ammunition, full of weapon systems and complicated weapon systems. Now the Turkish EOD forces now is struggling inside the residences of Rasulayn and Tel Abyad in order to explode them. And all those weapon systems came from United States to the Turkish border. We know it very well. For this reason, to say that Erdogan is trying to reshape the Turkey's foreign policy in line with Russia does not reflect the real picture of the situation.
I see your point.
The West forced Mr. Erdogan to reshape the relation in between Russia.
Pavel, we've seen the Russians at the same time further testing new territories. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, where Putin made a visit recently. Is he trying to build new partnership with countries that were for many, many decades traditional allies of the US?
Well, the gist of Russian political game in the Middle East is that Russia has a great advantage that it can speak and has working relationships with everyone. We speak and have good relations with Iran and Israel at the same time, with Turkey and Saudi Arabia and Egypt at the same time, with Turkey and the YPG at the same time. So Russia, that puts Russia in a very unique position to be a broker that can speak to everyone, and also that has assets on the ground and capabilities on the ground that make it just not also a broker, but also a power broker there. And that gives Russia more weight than its overall military and economic capability should actually derive from. So that's, yes, and that's working out. That's a very smart policy, a strategy that Russia is running in the Middle East, while the United States doesn't seem to have any kind of strategy worth talking about at all.
Samuel, it could be...
There are a lot of capabilities.
I see your point. Samuel, as Pavel said, this is a smart move from the Russians, but given the fact that Russia does not have the financial might that the West and the Americans in particular have, don't you see this as a gamble that could backfire in the future?
I think that Russia is not looking to replace the United States as the influential power in the Middle East or as the security guarantor, or to assume even economic responsibilities in terms of investments and development that China is assuming. The idea that Russia is in direct competition with the US and China is often discussed in US editorials, but I think it's completely baseless. I think what we're moving towards is a tripolar Middle East with varying spheres of responsibility. The US being the primary security guarantor, China being the primary economic development guarantor and investor, and Russia being the diplomat that can navigate the conflicting interests of all sides. And I think if Russia sticks to that sphere, it can be very successful. Of course, when it wants to marry that diplomatic influence with hard power, it will likely have to rely on external capital. So for the Syrian reconstruction, it will have to appeal to the UAE, China, and some others. But in its diplomatic role of talking to all sides, it has the potential to be uniquely successful. I agree with Pavel.
Okay, Yusuf, if the Russians decide in the future to step in, try to mend fences between Turkey and Syria, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Turkey and the UAE, is that fine from a Turkish perspective?
I can say that Turkey is in the region since for more than 1,000 years, and he is neighboring and facing toward to the west for more than, again, 1,000 years. So I don't say that Turkey will turn its face to Russia, turn its face to West. Turkey is turning its face and building a policy in relation with the West, but at the same time in relation with Russia, but at the same time without no doubt in relation with all kind of Asian countries and Middle East.
Thank you.
That does not mean that Turkey is turning its face completely to the Russia. But after the Cold War, you know that there are many different economical powers emerging around the world.
And let me ask this question to Pavel. Pavel, now with the Russians entering the OPEC Plus Pact 2016 with Saudi Arabia, where they have become very crucial in controlling the output of oil, are the Russians using energy to replace the Americans in the Middle East?
Well, Russia does see itself as a kind of a successor to the Soviet Union, and that does see itself in a kind of standoff with the United States, not only in the Middle East, but in many other parts of the world around its other parts of its borders. Yes, Russia does not have the capabilities. Of course, going into a kind of cartel agreement with OPEC and primarily the Saudi Arabia is important. That's a practical move because Russia wants to maintain a stable price of oil. The Saudis need it, the Russians need it. Without that, the Russian state cannot function if the oil falls again in price very dramatically. But using energy to kind of take over the entire region, that's not in Russia's reach. I don't think anyone here in Moscow has such ambition.
Thank you. It's good to talk to you. Pavel Flegenhauer, I'm afraid we'll have to leave it there. Thank you to you and to Yusuf Alabarda and to Samuel Ramani. And thank you too for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website aljazeera.com. For further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Hashem Ahelbarra, and the entire team here in Doha. Bye for now.